Hello and welcome. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the many lands on which we work, and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. EAAA is committed to ensuring equitable and inclusive responses to end elder abuse for people with diverse characteristics and life experiences. We at EAAA honour the older people in our community who have endured abuse and neglect, and we note the important contribution their lived experience makes to our work. We support the International Convention on the Rights of Older Persons and aspire to a day when everyone can live a life free from abuse. I'm Philippa McDonald, and this webinar is brought to you by compass.info and Elder Abuse Action Australia, EAAA, and it's funded by the Australian Attorney General's Department. Compass.info is an incredible website, so keep an eye out for such a valuable resource. Today, we're talking about ageism. Let's start with this message from Carol Ann Barkler, the Chief Executive of the Age Rights Advocacy Service, ARIS.
Every day we see the depth of wisdom and breadth of experiences older Australians have, both in the community and in the workforce. However, ageism often results in overlooked potential, feelings of invisibility, and disregard for those invaluable voices.
Did you know there's a global campaign against ageism? Certainly, if you'd watched Dr. Kay Patterson's National Press Club address, you'd know about that global campaign, which we'll talk about a little more. And the World Health Organization tells us ageism refers to the stereotypes, how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act, directed towards people on the basis of their age. It can be institutional, interpersonal, or self-directed. Let's hear some thoughts from Rebecca Ross, Chief Executive and Principal Solicitor of JusticeNet South Australia.
Ageism, like most discrimination, can look like a lot of things, but often it can look like discrediting or undermining older people, which can have devastating consequences in the justice system. This sees older people at an immense disadvantage when fighting for their rights.
So, really important message from Rebecca. Time now to meet our panellists. Dr. Kay Patterson AO began her role as the Age Discrimination Commissioner in 2016. In that job, she's had three key priority areas: age discrimination and the workplace, elder abuse in the community, and older women's risk of homelessness. A senator for 21 years, Kay served as a cabinet minister in the health and social security portfolios between 2001 and 2006. She is a current member of the Australian Government's Council of Elders. Kay was appointed an officer of the Order of Australia in 2016. Dr. Lixia Tu is a Senior Research Fellow at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. She's undertaken a range of research areas in the areas of family transitions and wellbeing, particularly relating to issues such as relationship stability and its impact on financial living standards and personal wellbeing, parenting arrangements after separation. And she also played a very important role in the prevalence study of elder abuse. Marianne Geronimo is the Director of Policy, Health and Ageing at the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils Australia, FECA. She's passionate about evidence-based and ground-up policy making, where older persons and women are active participants in the process. She has been leading FECA's advocacy on access and equity for people with culturally, ethnically and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and an ongoing connection with aged care sector reform, primary healthcare strategy and development, and of course, the pandemic response. Welcome to our wonderful panelists. Thanks for joining us. Now, we're inviting everyone to ask questions in the chat box. We ask you to be respectful and refrain from identifying anyone and direct your questions to our panelists. If you find any of the issues distressing, please take this number down. It's the Elder Helpline, 1-800-353-374, 1-800-353-374. Let's start with you, Dr. Kay Patterson. What is ageism and how does ageism affect people?
Well, thank you very much, Philippa. Ageism is most probably the least understood of all the isms. We know what racism is and what sexism is, but ageism is sort of acceptable. You know, it's okay to laugh about age. It's okay to send people funny birthday cards. Ageism is pervasive and it's pernicious, and it can have devastating effects on people. And it goes both ways. You know, younger people never take their heads out of a telephone. They don't listen. They don't look after their finances. Older people are crabby, they're frail, they're not engaged in the community. All these sorts of prejudices and things that are ascribed to different age groups, which don't categorise any of us at any age. So I think ageism is least understood, and the World Health Organization talks about ageism being the least understood of all these prejudices. It can have devastating effects on people, and it can be malevolent or it can be benevolent. It can be taking care of people and then suddenly slipping into overprotecting people and taking away their autonomy and their rights to make decisions for themselves. I know I've been guilty of that with my mother. She came back from America when I was in the Senate, and I said, Mum, it'd be so much easier if you lived in Canberra or Melbourne. No, I'm going back to my magpies and my gum trees on the South Coast. And I thought, oh, hell. And then I stopped and thought, no, that's her choice. It's going to be harder for me to see her. But I was at the point of saying, I could look after you better. And I think we've got to let people make decisions for themselves. The other thing is we can take on ageism to ourselves. And that's detrimental. You know, oh, I'm too old to do that. Or people can say, you shouldn't do that at your age. My family tried to stop me sledding about 5 years ago when we were in Europe. And I said, hang on, the kids are going sledding. Why am I not going sledding? So we have to assert ourselves as older people, not to have people overprotect us and not take on ageism. We all know from research that ageism reduces our life expectancy by up to 7 years. They say it's as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Well, what we've got to do is to say, no, we object to ageism. We are all individuals. We all need to be respected for that. Ageism is pernicious, and it can also be the underpinning of discrimination in the workforce, discrimination in terms of people having the rights to do things. So I think it's absolutely vital we understand it and we say no to ageism.
And look, I have to ask, how was the sledding?
It's fantastic.
Marianne, in your report for EveryAGE Counts, you found differences in how ageism is interpreted in various culled communities. Tell us more.
Yeah, and I agree with Dr. Kay Patterson. There is that issue, although all the way more or least understood in the community. So we had this study with older persons from Arabic, Chinese, Greek, and Vietnamese backgrounds. Most of the participants have been living in Australia for the last 25 years of their lives. And basically what we found is that ageism is a concept that is generally unknown among these groups of older persons. For one, there's no direct translation of that word in their respective languages. However, they are aware of things happening out there in the broader society that they feel showing disrespect or not valuing older persons. Some of the examples they raised in our study was that there are policies that provide more concessions, for example, to the young population, but they believe that we do need to take care of the young people because they are the future of our country. They know, though, that as older people, they are paying more for travel and health insurance, for example. They have heard of workplace practices that are prejudicial to them as older people. They know of people closely to their family or friends being passed over for positions due to their age. They also watch reports on television of older people being mistreated in nursing homes, for example. So there is a general sense as well that ageism affects women more in these communities. But overall, it appears that in CALD communities, if I could use that word, ageism is moderated in these cultures because there's very strong family connections and because community networks exist. In Arabic, Chinese, Greek, and Vietnamese cultures, for example, older persons contribute to the well-being of the community by helping raise grandchildren, and they provide care for other older members of the family or the family in general. In ethnic associations, for example, you can see older persons as the leaders or the volunteers, and because of that, they have that stature in the community. Overall, again, there is a sense that families and communities protect, sustain, and nurture their elders. So it is very important for the communities. They're valued for their wisdom, and in many cases, for the extreme sacrifices that they had to do for the next generation to enjoy a better life in Australia. However, participants do recognize that this is changing as younger generations redefine these roles and relationships. And the concept of filial piety, or the children's primary duty of respect, obedience, and care for older persons, it is also evolving.
Very interesting. And Lixia, you've got some fascinating research to take us through attitudes towards older people and how this relates to ageism.
Thank you, Philippa, for having me. So some of the findings I will just show later on is coming from the elder abuse, National Elder Abuse Prevalence Study Research Project. In 2019, the Attorney General's Department commissioned Australian Institute of Family Studies to conduct a national elder abuse prevalence study to find out the prevalence and the nature of elder abuse. So in this study, there are two surveys. The first one is a survey of a general community with a sample of 3,400 people ages 18 to 64 years. And another survey is the survey for older people. So in this slide, is based on the survey for general community. A series of questions are asked to gauge people's attitudes towards older people. And this slide shows that the average rating on each of the statement questions, and you can see at the bottom of the slide, the axis. So the higher rating means greater ageist attitudes. So what we found is that overall, general community do not hold ageist attitudes. So you can see the average rating on these statements were quite low. However, a significant minority still hold ageist views. For example, nearly 1/3 of respondents agreed, that is, gave a rating 7 to 10 on the scale not to 10, that older people need to be protected from harsh realities of the society. And this really echo what Kay said, sometimes it's overprotecting, actually taking of the agencies for older people, often take the agency from older people. And on this, in this study, we also found close to 1/10 agree that older people are the drain on the health care system and the economy. That's really bad, holding that view. And such view can influence their attitudes towards elder abuse and other aspects relating to older people.
Thank you very much. And a little later on, we'd love you to take us through some other research that you've got in this area. Thank you. Hey, what have you discovered about ageism that you didn't already know?
Well, I discovered because I'm older myself now, so I've had ageism directed towards me, especially that episode about the sledding. But I suppose one of the discoveries I didn't appreciate, the so-called competition between the forms of human rights discrimination. And it's a sort of race to the bottom. I mean, that's what discrimination does. It pits people against each other, be it race or gender or age. If you understand the thinking behind discrimination, then we can start to deflect and challenge that competitive narrative. My team and I undertook a research called What's Age Got to Do with It? And we had 3 different age groups. They defined their age group, whether they were young, middle-aged or older. And what was interesting in that research was that there was a real understanding between the generations. If you read the press, you think World War III was breaking out between the generations. But this data showed that they said, look, it was much tougher for those people. They were babies in the war, or they were, they didn't have free education, some of them, and then others say, now we had free education because it's changed over the lifetime of those who are living. And they expressed an understanding of the different age groups, and they were sympathetic towards them. And we found that very interesting. And I think it says a lot. And sometimes they're even more critical. We did a future piece of work, and they're more critical about their own age group. My friends are always on social media and they don't look after their finances. And older people saying, oh, they never get out and do things. So sometimes we're as ageist about our own age groups as we are towards different age groups. So I found that fascinating. The other thing that I think is interesting, and this is a bit of a hot off the press because we're not launching it to the 13th of July, but we've just done a piece of work called Changing Perspectives, Testing and Aging Intervention. And we had 300 people who we tested beforehand. They did a 2.5-hour either face-to-face or a virtual training, tested them later, then tested them 3 months later. The results are amazing. And all I can say is that I learned that other than racism and sexism, unlike those two, ageism can be shifted. It can be changed. And that data is I'm looking forward to somebody else doing some more research because it's, I think, quite profound. One of the other things I've learned is that, and I guess it is about ageism. It's about how we've neglected the CALD community, for example, and we've been doing, because ageism underpins a lot of elder abuse. And we've done some work with the CALD community, a small a toe in the water of 5 CALD groups. And they knew about wills, but they knew nothing about powers of attorney. And so I think it's absolutely vital that we don't exclude CALD community people from knowing what their rights are. And in some ways, it's sort of racism and ageism intersecting. And those people miss out because we don't have as many materials for them to understand about their rights. And I think that's an area that we can all do better on.
Look, thank you. And yes, and this is something that we've got to talk more about in this webinar. Can I just throw you a question, Kay, from our Q&A? How does ageism contribute to financial elder abuse?
I think it contributes in a number of ways, like especially with COVID and with the pressures now, economic pressures facing families breaking down as they did during COVID. The son or daughter returning home. Oh, mum, you don't need to live in this big house. I need to, I'm going to reestablish myself. Our marriage is broken down. And they put pressure on older people because there's an attitude, well, you shouldn't be living here. Well, I'm sorry. It's my home until I decide what I'm going to do with it. And I've given, people give their children opportunities of education and all sorts of things, and they shouldn't be harassed. Or, if you don't give me this money, you won't see the grandchildren. I hear terrible things from the banks about people coming in and they say, well, I'm too scared to not give him the money because I won't see the grandchildren. So financial pressures can place enormous, it's ageist in a way. And also that they say, well, mum doesn't really need this much money, I'll just take a bit. Well, that if you have the person's power of attorney, it's illegal just to take a bit. It's theft. And it's theft against older people. So ageism is pernicious and it's pervasive and it leads to terrible things, not just financial, but to all sorts of other behaviours, which sometimes would break my heart when I see people being neglected or being locked up. As a man I heard about maybe a couple of years ago, his niece locked him up in an upstairs room, and the only way he'd get help was to make paper planes and try and get them into next door to tell them to call the police. But that happens in Australia. It's unbelievable.
Shocking. And Marianne, you think we've got a pretty archaic idea of aging, really, and that that we're not asset framing ageism aging, and it's becoming ageism.
Yes, I agree. Many countries, including Australia, we seem stuck in the idea of aging that was conceptualized during the Industrial Revolution. In that era, 50 years old is considered ripe old age. And this is understandable because during that time, most people work in labor-intensive jobs. And so societies and the public policies put a premium on productive age. So because of this, our life trajectories have always been from birth to about 20 years old. We need to acquire education and then enter the workforce. And by the time we reach old, age at the time, in that concept, our late 50s to 60s, we are supposed to retire. And retirement means non-productive age. We become invisible and largely beneficiaries of support. But I'm sure everyone would agree that we have evolved by leaps and bounds since the industrial age. On average, for example, Australians born in recent years can now expect to live up to 83 years old. That's a long life. Longevity is something that, considered as one of the greatest achievements of mankind in the last century. And yet our society and public policies still operate in that old notion and framework of aging and productive age.
So then how are other countries doing it better by embracing aging as a strength? Tell us about Singapore, Marianne.
Yeah, just a bit of context. Before migrating in Australia, I was a scholar at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. And I worked there for like a decade on international policy advocacy on research on aging. And in Singapore context, by 2030, and that is about 7 years from now, 1 in 4 Singaporeans will be aged 65 and older. Australia will have, I think, a few more decades to reach that super aging, context. So the Singaporean government understood the impacts of becoming a super aging country and decided that aging is a priority policy agenda. They recognized that aging cuts across several domains such as health, social care, employment, and thus required a whole of government response. To this, they created the Ministerial Committee on Aging, which was formed to really coordinate government policies and programs relating to population aging. And they also created out of that the Action Plan for Successful Aging, which subsequently launched in 2015 as a national blueprint for initiatives to help Singaporeans age confidently and lead active lives. The other thing that's interesting in that approach is that they took on the life course perspective, and they focused on upstream prevention through preventative health programs supporting older persons, even from the Singaporeans, even from the early ages. So they learned so much as well from other countries like the Netherlands. You can see that in both countries, aged care services are co-located in busy commercial buildings, for example. This has been a very conscious decision, so people of all ages learn to coexist, to accept aging as a natural course of life, and not to hide older people in homes or villages. I used to lead programs to support government create a really comprehensive approach, taking a whole of community knowledge and understanding of aging, preparing for old age, and understanding dementia, and how to support dementia, people with dementia in the community. So this is just one of the many place-based programs to normalize aging, and that's not unique to Singapore. There's so many other countries doing these already. Over here, when we say it takes a village to raise a child, the belief in some of these countries is that similarly, it takes a village for everyone to age well.
Yes, well, look, thank you for that. And your deep experience there in Singapore and throughout Southeast Asia, which can teach us so much. And Kay, we're getting quite a lot of interest in that research you say is going to be released on the 13th of July. And how can people find that? And how will you be making that announcement?
Well, it'll be put up on our Australian Human Rights website, and hopefully I'll be doing national radio. I've promised somebody that they'll get first bid on it. So hopefully that. The other thing I just wanted to mention, Philippa, was I often quote, and Marianne's just raised it with us, but when I was in 1976, some people watching will remember 1976, there were 125 centenarians in the whole of Australia. Now they're about 5,300. And we think in 2040, 18 years' time, there'll be 16,000 or more. So many of us will live not just to 83, which is the average, but many of us will live into our 90s and 100s. And we've just finished that wonderful portrait project of 465 young people painting 465 centenarians. It's a real wake-up call that many of us have to plan for a much longer life.
And that project you're talking about is at the National Portrait Gallery?
No, it's at the Belconnen Arts Centre until Sunday.
Okay, well, if you're in Canberra, Belconnen Arts Centre till Sunday, and that's something of strength and beauty. It's
unbelievable. The portraits are, I'm sure there's a couple of future Archibald winners in that lot.
Wow. Lisa, let's bring you in here. We're navigating a whole lot of subjects, but we're looking at that link between ageism and elder abuse. If you could take us through your slides of recognition of elder abuse behaviours and attitudes towards elder abuse.
Yes, sure. And can someone show the slides? Yeah. So in both the surveys I mentioned, respondents were asked whether they regard each of the listed behavior on this slide as abuse of an older person. So listed behaviors range from pushing, shoving an older person to threatening to send them to aged care facility. So responses, just as summarized in this slide, is proportion of response that were yes, always to each item. So they also, I just want to say this slide, the SGC means a younger sample, age 18 to 64 years, and SOP means age 65 plus. So overall, the items describing physical abuse and sexual abuse behaviors had the strongest recognition, and you can see on the top, the pushing, shoving of older person with the around 90% of in both samples agree always, yes, always abusive to older person. And the items describing financial abuse received the next strongest recognition. But in comparison, when you look at further down, items describing neglect or threatening behavior, sending older person to residential aged care facilities were less well recognized. And you can also see on this slide that the levels of recognition of various elder abuse behaviors were lower among the sample of older person compared to the sample of a younger respondents. Can we go into the next slide? That's the attitudes towards elder abuse. So the respondents of both samples were also asked about their attitudes towards elder abuse, whether abuse can be understandable if an older person is difficult to deal with, or if the person committing the abuse is under a lot of stress, and abuse of older person is a private matter to be handled in the family. And you can see agreement with these statements are quite low. This shows a percentage agreeing, which is on a scale, they just say, sort of agree or strongly agree. And most respondents did not agree with the notion, that elder abuse can be excused if older person difficult, or the person committing abuse and is under a lot of stress. And they didn't see elder abuse as a private matter. But however, a minority did hold those condoning views that elder abuse could be understandable in some situations. And you can also see the older people are more likely to hold this condoning view. They sort of internalize this, sort of treatment to them, and they want it to be considered this is a, sort of private matter, should not be, sort of go beyond outside. And ageism, attitudes towards older people and the recognition of elder abuse behaviors are interrelated. We found that ageist attitudes were linked with the lower levels of recognition of elder abuse behaviors, and they hold more tolerant attitudes towards elder abuse.
That's really incredible to join the dots in that way. And what really came out for me is that sense that elder abuse is a private matter to be handled by family. And this is something as a nation we have been coming to terms with in other types of abuse. And I might bring you in, Kay. I mean, you had a speech yesterday, your wonderful speech about building a better cultural inheritance for an aging Australia. What resonates for you when you see that so many, not a majority, but so many people consider elder abuse to be a private matter to be handled by a family? I think you might be on mute, sorry.
I did mute myself, sorry, because I had a notification came in. Look, I was at Sydney University doing child development. And we had a wonderful, wonderful lecturer who showed us some videos, not videos, black and white, 16mm black and white films in those days. And it was of children who'd been abused in America, and teaching us that if they had burns that were equal on their legs, and somebody said, oh, they were on the beach with a towel on, you wouldn't have absolutely parallel marks that maybe indicated they'd been put into hot water, or that they, and symbols of how they'd been shaken, the patterns of bruising on their arms. The other academics said she was an alarmist, that sort of thing didn't happen in Australia. And when I emceed the apology to the victims and survivors of child abuse, I was sitting there thinking, these people were children when we were being taught this, and the academics were saying it didn't happen. That's where child abuse was. Then we had family abuse. Oh, it's between the husband and wife. It's nothing to do with us. The police shouldn't get involved. That's moved on. And we've still got this thing in elder abuse, and it's not exactly like family abuse, because if you choose a partner and the family says, well, that wasn't a great idea, they stand behind you if there's abuse involved, usually. But with elder abuse, it often divides the family. My brother is stealing money from my mother. I'm never going to talk to him again. It breaks down families, siblings against siblings. But also, if you've made a mistake in a partner, you might be able to move on. But when you've got a family, you can't have another family. And also, there's shame involved. What have I done that my son or my daughter or my niece is treating me like this? So it's a very different form. Elder abuse is a form of family abuse, but different. But it is everybody's business. It's employers' business. We shouldn't see ageism. It's in every sphere of life. When I read in the annual report that people are either sexually abused or physically touched inappropriately, between 48 to 50 people a week in aged care, my heart just broke. I thought, what is going on that in our community that can happen? And I'm really worried about aged care in the home, that elder abuse and ageism, then the following on elder abuse, there's no oversight, not the same oversight as in an aged care facility where a visitor might see something or another staff might see something. I think we've got to be absolutely careful. With isolation is one of the major factors in elder abuse. So ageism and isolation mixed together is a horrible concoction, and we've got to be sure that we make sure there are things in place to protect older people, particularly in their homes.
And thank you, because in the Q&A, people are welcoming your data, Lixia, and the tipping point that you're talking about between ageism and elder abuse, Kay. Let's take a poll now, and that'll come up on the screen in a moment. The poll we're asking you to participate in comes from EveryAGE Counts. And if you're after more details, this is the bonsai poll. We will put the longer quiz in the chat box after this webinar. So which best matches your views about older people in the workplace? A, older people have an obligation to retire and make way for younger people, sorry. Age is irrelevant. It's about whether or not you can do the job. Or C, older people, older workers tend to be less effective and have more accidents at work. So 2, if you hear a friend describe his neighbour as an old dear, what would you think? It's harmless enough and often said affectionately. I can see it's a bit patronising, but it's not my business to get involved. It's belittling and unacceptable. I should call him out. And 3, when a son accompanies his older mother to the doctor, who should the doctor talk to? A, the son, B, the mother. The doctor should ask the son if he minds that they talk to his mother. So there we go. So take a look at that poll just for a few more moments. These are very real life situations, and I'm sure we can all relate to them. But this is really testing you as to some of those internalized ageist attitudes you may or may not have. And I think it's a real reminder to us that we need to check in what our attitudes are. Are we helping too much? Are we being patronizing? Are we being downright ageist? So let's move along and have a look, because that is getting some feedback. That's kind of a challenging poll. Our polls in the past have been quite quick hit, and this one isn't. So I think we'll come back to that a little later, and I'm going to bring you in, Kay, because what are you seeing in terms of your role as a commissioner at the Human Rights Commission, specialising in age discrimination? What kind of complaints are you seeing, and when are you seeing that tipping point between ageism and elder abuse? It's a big question.
Well, I think there's a complaints and conciliation section within the Australian Human Rights Commission, and that's dealt with quite separately from us and quite confidentially. We do get a summary of those complaints, and last year, the data we have, about 6% of the complaints that come into the Commission are about age discrimination, and a majority of those are about discrimination in the workplace. So, and it can happen at 3 points, at recruitment, it can happen during your employment, and it can happen in terms of retirement. You need to retire. So, but one of the problems with that is that it's you said, he said. Sometimes I'll say, as soon as I walked in, they gave me some cursory questions and I walked out because I looked at my grey hair and they didn't take any notice of me. Very hard to pin that down. But when there's some evidence of discrimination, they're called in for a conciliation, and often that just makes the company understand that they've been discriminating. So it doesn't have any authority. They can't impose anything, but sometimes I'll say, you need to compensate this person because they came in for a job, they had to come, they flew in for the interview, or they caught a train or whatever, and it needs compensation. The other thing is that the late Susan Ryan, who was my predecessor, did a report called Willing to Work, and she found that there was discrimination in the workplace, that older people were willing to work, but there was discrimination. And she carried out some research with the Australian Human Resources Institute, and I've continued that. So 2014, 16, 18, 21, we've just done 23. When she first did it, 52% of companies said they had an age above which they'd prefer or would not employ people. And that was in the early 60s. That's dropped down now to 27, to 20% or 18%. But that means 1 in 6 companies still have an age above which they would choose not to employ people. And you think, how stupid. When you look at the research even further, they talk about the same piece of research, all the qualities of older people: reliability, loyalty, energy, wisdom. And they talk about the benefits of young people, being able to do IT, enthusiastic, whatever. And then if they realised, and we call them 5G companies, it's not about communications, 5-generation companies are the most successful. Intergenerational work between young people and older people and cross-mentoring is vital, and any smart company wouldn't be saying we're not going to employ people over 65. You know, it's or 60 is the age. So I see that we've seen an improvement since Susan did that first research, but it's still not good enough. Ageism is still alive and well in recruitment.
And look, it's aided and abetted now by AI. You know, you put your CV in and they run the numbers and see that maybe you've been in the workforce 30 or 40 years and you're struck out. So that's a very basic.
Well, one of the problems is that a lot of HR people are young. We need to shift their ageism attitude, like we're trying to shift workers in aged care, to understand that there are benefits, you know, and that there's this belief that older people don't use IT. You know, people, you know, I taught my staff and the people at the commission how to do delayed emails. They weren't using them. People don't use them. They're wonderful. You just put this little arrow, because young people look around and find what the little arrows are, and it says delay email, and you can send it to yourself a week later, so you don't have to remember, you know. And so we've got some skills we can teach young people as well as they can teach us.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And congratulations on your work and the work of the late Susan Ryan in shifting those attitudes. I mean, you've gone from half of people being, those recruiters being ageist, to 1 in 5, which is quite dramatic, and it shows that attitudes can be shifted. There is some, you know, light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, much more needs to be done, but huge call out to UK and the work you've been doing there.
And Susan
thank you.
Really pushed that very strongly.
Yeah. Now I'd like to go to another video, which I think raises a really important point in terms of people who might have English as their second or third language and the difficulties they can encounter, and what is another form of ageism, which can promote isolation in a very big way. So let's go to Dr. Ian Harmsdorf, Deputy Chair, Multicultural Communities Council of South Australia.
The large number of people in Australia who have English as their second language find their second language is much less fluent as they get older. Many people in positions of authority make no allowance for this and become very quickly quite irritable. This is extremely distressing for older bilingual people.
A very powerful message from Dr. Ian Harmsdorf there. Marianne, how are you seeing ageism and racism colliding? What impact is it having? And tell us about some of the advocacy you're doing.
Thank you, Philippa. I think one of the most important, if not the most important part of my job at FECA is really understanding the situation of all the persons from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And there's no better way of doing that than to talk to them directly. So in the last 6 months, I've been, talking to more than 300 older persons across the country. And I met many who in their countries of origin have been CEOs of large companies, leading hundreds of employees, heads of international NGOs working in the most complex social issues with many governments, lawyers, engineers, architects, scientists, artists, and so on. But when they move to Australia, they can't even find a job in a grocery because they don't have the so-called local experience, or because English is not good enough, their English is not good enough, or because they are of mature age, or they are all of that, no local experience, English not good, and old. Yet here we are in dire need of workers across all sectors. People who are hiring tend to hire people who look and sound like them, who can answer questions in the manner that they expected, who say the right words. There are so many cases of migrants being more qualified and have more years of experience than the successful candidate. A classic example, and you will see many of these in aged care, for example, is that of nurses, or in healthcare in general, nurses from migrant backgrounds. Many of them arrive at the very least with 5 years of experience. And yet, when they see, when they work, they see new grads and junior nurses given leadership roles. Policymakers would often say policies are colorblind, age blind, gender blind. But the people who wrote them, the policies, and implement them come from a certain culture, which may not have an understanding of the life experiences of people who are from migrant backgrounds. FECA believes that it's very important for government agencies to lead the way in building cultural competency. And a good place to start is to have a better representation of multicultural Australia among public servants, and for policies to truly reflect people's lived experiences.
Marianne, it's very interesting. And I think Ian also raises the point that, or suggestion that often older people are not given access to translation and interpreting services when they need it, when they might be in a vulnerable situation. Is there any evidence to support that?
So Philippa, I've been almost to close by end of this month a program across the country of a aged care navigation in CALD communities. And over just 1 year, we have been able to kind of support older persons, 6,000 over. And one of the key problems that people have been telling us is that some aged care providers refuse to take them in because reportedly they don't have enough people who can provide language support. Clearly, this is a human rights issue because you need language support to be able to, live well within the context of that aged care, service, but also to just be yourself and, be with whoever it is that provides care for you. But this is an ongoing concern in which, I'm very cognizant that government is really doing its best, but this is an ongoing challenge for a lot of older people in the community.
Look, thank you. And Lixia, can I bring you in here? Who is most ageist, and what about the interconnection between ageism and intergenerational support? Sorry for the double-barrel question.
That's okay. Thank you, Philippa. So we do find there is some interconnections between ageism, the views on intergenerational support. So come back to your first question, who is hold more ageist views. We do find the views towards older people vary with some demographic variables. For example, men a bit more ageist towards older people compared to women, and young people, those in their 20s, late teens, and more likely to hold this sort of attitudes. And interesting, we also find cultural backgrounds also influence their views towards older people. For example, those born in Asian and some other countries, for example, Southern East European country origin, Middle East and Africa, more likely to hold ageist views. The difference is not great, but they do have a more inclination towards that direction. And in our study, we also look at people's attitudes towards intergenerational support, whether one generation should provide the other financial support if living with them, for example, parents to adult children and adult children to aging parents. And we find there is strong sense of the support between the generations, but we do find there is some mixed views in terms of whether family members are entitled to some of the older people's asset if they assist the older person on a regular basis. And so it's quite a split. Some really, we don't find one over another. So interesting, we find that ageism do influence intergenerational support view in a complex way, and ageist attitudes tend to associate with a strong sense of endorsement of intergenerational support, and interesting the support of intergenerational support also closely linked with the stronger sense of entitlement to older people's asset. So that's it's just in a way, I think the views on intergenerational support is work in a complex way. Almost there is a sense of expectation of reciprocal. It's not unconditional. So I think what come out of this is the importance to break this link, sort of ageism, and also, sort of support when needed across generations.
Well, thank you for that. And Kay, it's a big question, but what could governments, employers, the media, and the community do to change attitudes?
Well, local governments can do things. I've moved recently from Melbourne to Canberra, but my local government in Melbourne had a program where people would cook an extra meal and take it and eat it with somebody who needed company once a month, or just keeping an eye on them. And you think that's a nice idea. That's easy for people to do, especially a person who's got a spouse that's traveling and they can, take a night off to go and visit someone. And there's a LG Pro, which is local government professionals, and they're very proactive in developing programs for older people and to break down ageist attitudes and to reduce isolation, which is one of the biggest factors in elder abuse, of course, of older people being isolated. And state governments can do a lot to improve, for example, thinking of councils too in planning. We've been looking at how can you actually, as Marianne was saying, integrate older people. Why put them out in sort of isolated aged care facilities or especially retirement living, to have mixtures? And I've just been involved in a project in French's Forest, or assisting, where they wanted to put in an over 55 living 10 places for people with moderate to mild intellectual disability and 10 women who would otherwise be at risk of homelessness. And it took them 3 attempts at the council and then having to go to NCAP to get the permit to build an extra floor to fund this. And you think, here was a perfect example. Think about people looking after an elderly, looking after a child who's got a disability and they're aging, and they set them up in the community in their own unit. I can't imagine other people living there would take on and help with that responsibility as well. And it makes, we say it takes a community to raise a child. And as I think it was Marianne said, it takes a community to protect someone from elder abuse. And also the federal government, all governments, can look at what are the intergenerational projects that are doable. Those wonderful ABC programs with teenagers were wonderful, but not necessarily replicable in the community because there was quite a bit of money involved in it. But these art and music projects and things that some of the local governments are doing are doable and scalable. And I think we've got to look at what are the innovative things that are being done to actually bring older people into the community, create that intergenerational relationship, because we know it breaks down ageism.
Yes, and I'm just wondering, Marianne or Lixia, would you like to comment on what Kay has just said? And Kay, if I could just ask you quickly, what was that local council doing that great work? I think they deserve a mention.
Burundara.
Lovely. Okay.
Oh, no, I just want to add that when Singapore started the integration of aged care facilities in high-rise buildings, it was a very interesting experiment when it started, because people have work and you always expect them to be like running around, always in a fast pace. But because there are older persons on wheelchairs walking so slowly to whatever floor their, services are, people tend to kind of pause and help them. And I think in that very moment, you reflect on your future as an, person also aging. I don't think anybody can escape aging. And then you get to be more, kind. You get to be more understanding, and you realize that there are things that you are doing personally that's affecting older people. It all starts from that, I believe.
Lixia, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Marianne said, sort of small things that do matter and the attitudes can change. And I think it just in the gradual and gentle way, sort of make people realize everyone will get old one day, and everyone has someone close to them who is old, and parents grandparents and auntie and uncles and so on. So it's really, I think we can change in small way and then to lead to huge change.
Thank you. Well, it might be a good time to come in with the poll. Let's ask compass.info to bring back our Compass Ageism poll. Am I ageist quiz? Okay. What did you say? Which best matches your views about older people in the workplace? Only 1% of you said older people have an obligation to retire and make way for younger people. Now, 98% of you said age is irrelevant. It's about whether or not you can do the job. And 1% said older workers tend to be less effective and have more accidents at work. So, you know, we might have had a captive audience here, but it is interesting. And okay, then our neighbours. If you hear a friend describe his neighbour as an old dear, what would you think? 17%, it's harmless enough and often said affectionately. 17%, I can see it's a bit patronising, but it's not my business to get involved. See, 66% of you said it's belittling and unacceptable. I should call him out. Okay, when a son accompanies his older mother to the doctor, who should the doctor talk to? And I think this is lawyers too. The son, none of you said the son. The mother, 96% the mother. But 4% of you said the doctor should ask the son if he minds that they talk to his mother. Goodness. Okay. Okay, just a quick remark from each of you of what you think that poll is telling us. Okay, you sort of took a bit of an intake of breath there and a bit of a, oh.
Well, I'd be cross if the doctor asked my brother whether he could speak to me. Look, I just want to say, I say all the time, and I think both the other two speakers sort of touched on it as well, but I just say that, you know, I do a graduation speech at a medical graduation, or I do a speech to young people or middle-aged people. The culture you set now is the culture you inherit when you're older. And I tell you what, I don't particularly want to have the culture that we saw in the Royal Commission in aged care being the culture of I need aged care. And so, but if nothing else motivates you, self-interest should, that it's inevitable. If you don't die, you will get old. And I want a place where older people are respected, irrespective of whether they've got dementia, irrespective of whether they're working or not working, irrespective of whether they're home or in the aged care. All of us have to contribute to our community and should be treated with respect. And the other thing I said yesterday is human rights doesn't diminish with age.
And Marianne and Lixia, have you got something to add here? Thank you, Kay.
That's very powerful, Kay. I mean, human rights does not stop when you get older. I think that's really, really profound. And I think to see real change, we need to let go of ageist policies. That's very important. So when we continue to isolate people from society by putting them in residential facilities, home-based care, without supporting sustained and natural interaction with the broader community, we create othering and we perpetuate ageist attitudes. The current narrative, as Kay mentioned, has always been about aged care. While that is important because we see there are problems, it has always been, about the care and the service. It's always about the deficit. To see change happen in the workplace, for example, I would like to say that the concept of retirement age needs to retire. It is time to build a vision on aging and longevity, not aged care.
Lixia, can I bring you in for a final statement, please?
Oh, I think both Kay and Marianne said it just spot on. It's powerful and great. And I really echo what they said. And just want to add on, it's attitudes and aging and elder abuse, all that are important. It's relevant to everyone. It's not just older people's, so the issue relating to older people. As Kay said, if you don't die, you will get old one day, and we all surrounded by someone old, as I said, who is in that age bracket. So it's everyone's business. I think it's really, really important. It's also self-serving, because you will reach that day for most of us.
Thank you so much, each of you, for this. And before we go, I would like to bring in EAA's co-chair, Sue Leach. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
Over to you. Thank you.
Yes. Look, I would personally like to acknowledge Dr. Kay Patterson's term as Age Discrimination Commissioner. And I do want to pass on a message from the EAAA board. When we met recently, we passed a formal motion, and I'd like to read it out today, just to express our thanks for Kay's work. So EAAA passed a motion to express appreciation of the work of the Honourable Kay Patterson AO in her role as the Age Discrimination Commissioner since her appointment in 2016. Over 7 years, she's advocated passionately and tirelessly to eliminate elder abuse. Her support and generosity towards EAAA has increased our profile and reach. EAAA and older people are grateful for her action and collaboration. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you very much, Sue. Yeah, I'm sad, but I'm ready to sort of change my life. I'm going to my 80th year next year, and I think I deserve to think about my body and looking after myself a bit better. But thank you very much, and I've loved EAAA, and I know it's on firm foundation now, and thank you for the role you play in it too.
Thank you, Kay.
And thank you, Kay. I think it's safe to say that we've all loved and appreciated everything you've done, and huge congratulations, and thank you for your strong role in really changing the world and amplifying our human rights. So thank you very much, Kay. And thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Lixia. And please join us again in a month's time for another webinar, which will focus on elder abuse. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And if anything has upset you, the Elder Helpline is 1-800-353-374, 1-800-353-374. Thank you so much. I'm Philippa McDonald. Goodbye.